My name is Cora Bennett. I'm 63 years old, a retired literature teacher, and for most of my life, I believed words could mend what silence broke. I live alone now, in the same white porch house my husband and I built 40 years ago. The house still smells faintly of cedar and black tea. I thought peace had finally found me, until the night my son decided to turn my dining table into a stage. Before I tell you what happened, let me say this. If you've ever had someone you love speak carelessly about something that meant everything to you, stay with me until the end. And if stories like these remind you that quiet strength matters more than noise, don't forget to follow this channel. We share real stories that heal, one calm truth at a time. That evening, the kitchen light was soft and golden. Steam rose from my teacup, curling toward the ceiling like a thought I couldn't quite name. Gavin, my only son, sat across from me, his fiancée, Lila, beside him. Two neighbors, Diane and her husband, had joined for dinner because Gavin wanted to celebrate. He had that easy grin I used to love, the one that made him look 8 years old again. For a moment, I thought it would be a simple meal. Then the conversation shifted. Gavin leaned back, wine glass in hand, and laughed a little too loud. "Well," he said, looking around the table, "at least Lila and I won't have to worry about housing. I'll inherit Mom's place anyway." The words landed with the sharpness of cold metal. The room fell quiet except for the faint hiss of the kettle I'd forgotten to turn off. Diane's smile froze halfway, and Lila's fingers tightened around her napkin. My heart did something small and painful in my chest. He didn't mean to be cruel, I told myself. Maybe it was just pride talking, or nerves, or wine. But the way he said it, so certain, so public, cut deeper than I expected. My late husband, Samuel, had once called this house our story in wood and brick. To hear it reduced to a brag in front of neighbors felt like hearing someone laugh at a prayer. I set my cup down carefully. "That's quite an assumption," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Gavin chuckled and raised his glass again. "Come on, Mom. Everyone knows it's tradition. The house will be mine someday." Lila glanced at me, eyes apologetic, but she said nothing. The conversation drifted to wedding colors and menus, but the warmth had drained from the room. My tea tasted bitter. I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending to refill the pot, though I only needed a moment to breathe. From the doorway, I watched them. Gavin talking fast, gesturing with the same restless hand Samuel used when excited. Lila nodding, her smile tight. Diane catching my eye, giving me a small, sympathetic shake of her head. I smiled back, because that's what mothers do when their hearts ache in public. On the counter sat an old family photo, framed years ago. It showed the three of us on the front steps, Samuel's arm around me, Gavin sitting between us holding the same brass key that opened the front door. The glass over the picture had a crack running through it, from top to bottom, like a quiet prophecy. I'd meant to replace it, but now, staring at that fracture, I realized it fit too perfectly. I ran a finger along the crack and whispered, "You always said he'd have to learn the hard way, didn't you, Sam?" A faint sound of laughter floated in from the dining room. Gavin was telling another story, this time about how he planned to remodel his house after the wedding. He was painting over memories that weren't his to paint. I wanted to correct him, to remind him that the deed wasn't just paper, but promise. Yet something stopped me, the echo of Samuel's voice from a recording I kept on my phone, a voicemail I could almost hear without pressing play. "Protect our blood, not our pride." I returned to the table, smiled politely, and listened as if nothing had happened. When Lila reached for her glass, her bracelet brushed against the table leg, knocking it slightly. My own glass trembled and fell, striking the edge of a plate before shattering on the floor. Red wine spread across the wood like a slow-moving wound. Gavin jumped up. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, kneeling to collect the pieces. The shards caught the light, small and sharp, and for a strange second, they looked like pieces of that broken photo. Lila crouched beside me, helping gather the fragments. Her voice was soft. "He didn't mean it that way." I met her eyes. "I know, but words still leave stains." She hesitated, then nodded. We finished cleaning in silence. When I stood, Diane handed me a towel, murmuring, "You handled that better than I would have." I smiled again, the practiced smile of someone who spent years turning disappointment into grace. Later that night, after the guests left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I walked through the quiet house. Every creak of the floorboard seemed to remember something my husband once said. I paused by the door where the cracked photo hung. The key in the picture glinted faintly under the hallway light. In the distance, I could still hear the faint echo of Gavin's laughter fading down the driveway. It wasn't cruel laughter, just careless, the kind of carelessness youth wears like armor. I wanted to believe he would realize what he'd done, call to apologize, or at least understand that inheritance isn't a trophy to brag about. But he didn't. I turned off the lights one by one. The house felt larger than usual, each room holding its breath. Before going upstairs, I whispered into the dark, "If you were here, Sam, what would you tell me to do?" No answer came, only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock. I touched the edge of the broken frame once more and felt a quiet certainty settle in me. Silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. That night, I placed the brass key from the photo into my bedside drawer, next to my husband's old letter. I didn't know exactly why, only that something inside me had begun to move, slow but steady, like the turning of a lock. And even as sleep finally came, one thought circled my mind, gentle but unshakable. He bragged about a house he thought was his. I stayed quiet. But quiet doesn't mean powerless. It means waiting for the right moment to choose. The next morning, I would find the courage to play that voicemail again, and everything would start from there. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the lace curtains and fell across my nightstand. The brass key I had placed there glowed faintly, like it remembered something I hadn't yet faced. I made myself a cup of tea, the same way I had for years. 2 minutes steeped, 1 teaspoon of honey, no sugar. The sound of the spoon clinking against the porcelain echoed in the quiet kitchen. I used to find that sound comforting. Now it only reminded me of how still the house had become. I sat at the table and looked at my phone. I hadn't played Samuel's old voicemail in months. Maybe it was because I was afraid of the ache that came with hearing his voice. Or maybe I knew that once I pressed play, I couldn't pretend things were fine anymore. My thumb hovered above the screen for a long moment before I finally tapped it. His voice filled the room, steady and warm, just as it had always been. "Cora," he said, "if you're hearing this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted. Remember what we built together. Protect our blood, not our pride. If things ever get noisy out there, you know where to find the quiet." The message ended with a small static click. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear dropped onto the edge of my cup, rippling the reflection of the morning light. I whispered, "I miss you, Sam," and wiped my face with the back of my hand. I reached into the drawer where I kept the key and held it in my palm. It was heavier than I remembered. Not just metal, but memory. Every scratch on its surface carried a story. Our first winter storm, Gavin's first steps, the day Samuel fixed the front door with his bare hands, because he refused to let anyone else touch it. I could still hear my husband's laughter in the kitchen, faint and ghostly. That sound used to be the center of our life. Now, I realized, it had become the echo I measured silence against. I turned the key over and over, thinking about what he had said. Protect our blood, not our pride. It was more than advice. It was permission. Permission to act, to stand, to protect what we had built without guilt or shame. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Harper Willis appeared on the screen. "Morning, Cora. Still considering the trust transfer? I can prepare the documents whenever you're ready." Harper had been Samuel's colleague and one of the few people I trusted completely. He'd helped us set up the original deed years ago. The thought of moving the house into a trust had crossed my mind before, but it had felt too final, too much like closing a chapter I wasn't ready to end. But after last night, after hearing Gavin's voice in my head repeating those careless words, I realized I might have been naive. I replied simply, "Let's talk this afternoon." Before I could put the phone down, another message appeared. This one from Maggie, my younger sister. "Thinking of you. Dinner went okay?" I smiled weakly and typed back. It was enlightening. She didn't press for details. Maggie never did. She'd been the quiet witness to my life for years, the one who saw through my calm without asking why. By noon, I found myself sitting at my old desk, the same one where I used to grade essays and write letters. Papers were scattered across it. Bank statements, insurance documents, a few unpaid property taxes. I opened a fresh notebook and began listing what I needed to protect. The deed, the savings, the vineyard lot we never sold, even the antique furniture Samuel restored by hand. Not because they were valuable, but because they were earned. I ran my finger along the spine of an old photo album. There was a picture of Gavin at 12, standing proudly beside Samuel, both of them holding a hammer. They were building a birdhouse in the yard. I could still hear my husband saying, "He'll learn what ownership means one nail at a time." Maybe Gavin had forgotten that lesson, or maybe I had forgotten to remind him. The phone rang. Harper's calm, precise voice came through. "Cora, good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "I've had better nights," I said softly. He paused. "Samuel once told me you were the steady hand in this family. I suppose that's still true." I smiled faintly. "Steady, yes, but steady doesn't mean still." "I agree. You're thinking about the trust, aren't you?" "Yes," I said. "I think it's time. Gavin's making decisions he doesn't understand. I'd rather not let those choices ruin what Samuel built." "Wise," Harper said. "I'll draft the documents. We can make it irrevocable under your sole control. It will protect you and keep the property safe from marital claims." "Would that seem cruel?" I asked Ed. "Not if it's done with love," he said. "Sometimes protection looks like distance." After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long while. The afternoon light had shifted, painting the living room in amber tones. I picked up the key again, pressed it into my palm until it left a mark, and whispered, "For love, not pride." I called Tom Hargrove next, our old financial advisor. He still remembered Samuel's voice too. "I'll help with the transfers discreetly," he said. "We'll make sure your son can't undo it in a rush." "Thank you, Tom." He hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Cora?" I looked around at the walls, the photos, the wood Samuel polished every spring. "I'm sure," I said, "but I won't tell him yet." That night, I placed the key back in its small velvet pouch and tucked it into the drawer again. I opened Samuel's old letter, the one he wrote before he passed. The ink had faded, but his words still held power. If silence becomes your weapon, use it gently. Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. I could hear the distant rumble of thunder, low and patient. It sounded like a reminder from somewhere beyond time. I sat by the window until the rain slowed, letting the quiet fill me from the inside out. I knew what I had to do now. Tomorrow, I'd meet Harper and begin the process. I would do it quietly, legally, and with the same care Samuel taught me. But before that, I whispered to the empty room, "Forgive me, Gavin. I'm doing this for you, even if you won't understand." The clock struck midnight before I finally went to bed. I turned off the lamp, but the image of that brass key stayed with me. It was no longer just a key to a house. It was a promise that I would not let love be mistaken for weakness again. When morning came, the next chapter would begin, and I would start to see what Gavin and Evelyn were planning behind my back. The following week began with a silence that felt deceptive. The air inside the house was still, but I could sense something stirring beyond the walls. Gavin's calls had become more frequent, filled with half-finished sentences and the restless energy of someone juggling too many secrets. He no longer asked how I was. He asked about the house, subtle questions at first, like when the next tax bill was due or whether I had checked the gutters lately. Every question carried the same unspoken weight. On Thursday night, he called again. "Mom, I've been thinking," he began, his tone too cheerful. "You know, maybe it's time to make some changes. Lila and I could take over the place, handle the upkeep, make it easier for you." I smiled into the silence. "The house isn't heavy for me yet, Gavin." He hesitated. "Yeah, but it's old and repairs cost money. I could help with that. We could even renovate, make it modern, good for resale value if we ever—" His voice trailed off, realizing what he'd said. "If you ever what?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "Nothing, Mom. Just planning ahead." When the call ended, I stared at the phone, my reflection faint in the dark screen. Planning ahead. The phrase didn't belong to my son. It belonged to someone else, someone feeding him the words. I had a feeling I knew who. The next day, Diane stopped by under the pretext of returning a book. She leaned against the porch rail and said in a low voice, "I saw Gavin downtown with that woman, Lila's mother. The one with Sid, the pearls." "Evelyn Morgan," I said, nodding. "She's been involved." "Involved?" Diane scoffed. "She was practically giving orders. They were meeting with some realtor. I heard her mention your address." A knot tightened in my chest. "Did you hear a name?" "Something like Beniko," she said. "Asian lady, sharp suit, expensive shoes." "Beniko Sato," I murmured. "She's a realtor who helped a neighbor sell last year." Diane frowned. "Cora, they were talking about listing prices." I thanked her quietly, then closed the door and stood in the hallway for a long moment. The sound of the refrigerator hum was steady, like a clock counting down. Listing prices. My son, my late husband's house, reduced to numbers. That evening, I called Maggie. She answered on the second ring. "You sound tired," she said. "I'm just thinking," I replied, "about the things people do when they're afraid of losing status." Maggie sighed. "You mean Gavin or the future in-laws?" "Both," I said, "but one of them learned it from the other." We spoke for a few minutes more. Then I hung up and sat by the window. Across the street, Diane's porch light flickered in the dusk. I could see my own reflection in the glass. Steady, but not unshaken. 2 days later, Gavin showed up unannounced, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he said, "Evelyn wants to help us with the wedding expenses. She's got some contacts in real estate who could help refinance the property, make everything simpler." I folded my arms. "Simpler for whom?" "For all of us," he said quickly. "Look, this is a good opportunity. You could take some of the equity and finally travel. You've earned that." I wanted to believe his concern was genuine, but the rehearsed rhythm of his words betrayed him. It wasn't his plan. It was Evelyn's. "Your father and I never saw this house as equity," I said softly. "We saw it as home." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Mom, it's just a house." The words stung more than he realized. I had once heard Samuel say, "If you ever hear someone call home just a house, know they've already lost something deeper." Before I could respond, Lila's car pulled up outside. She stepped out slowly, her expression tense. "Gavin," she said, "your mom deserves a say." He turned toward her, irritation flickering across his face. "We've talked about this, Lila. You agreed. I agreed to discuss options, not bulldoze your mother." He fell silent. For a brief moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who built birdhouses and left apology notes on the fridge. But the moment passed. He mumbled something about work and left. After he drove off, Lila lingered by the porch. "I'm sorry," she said. "My mother's been pushing him. She wants everything perfect before the wedding. Image, finances, all of it." I nodded. "Perfection has its price." She gave a small, helpless smile. "Evelyn thinks security comes from control. She doesn't mean harm, she just doesn't see people, only outcomes." I finished for her. Lila's eyes widened slightly. "Yes." We stood there in silence for a moment before she added, "Benico's been calling Gavin nonstop. Something about paperwork. I thought you should know." "Thank you," I said. After she left, I called Tom. "Can you check something for me?" I asked. "A realtor named Benico Sato. See if she's done any recent property filings under our address." "On it," he said. That night, while the house settled into its nighttime rhythm, I sat at the desk and reread Samuel's letter again. The ink seemed darker than before, as if time had chosen this moment to sharpen its warning. If things ever get noisy out there, you know where to find the quiet. I thought of Gavin's restless voice, of Evelyn's calculating tone, of Lila's hesitant apology. The noise was building, and I could feel it creeping toward my doorstep. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A new message, Gavin again. "Sorry if I sounded pushy earlier. I just want to make sure you're taken care of." Then, a second message followed. "Evelyn says we should meet with a notary next week, just for formality." Formality. I stared at the word until the letters blurred. That was when I knew it wasn't about pride anymore. It was about protection, the kind Samuel had trusted me to uphold. I typed back one sentence. "We'll talk soon, Gavin." Then I placed the phone face down, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark. Somewhere deep inside, a new resolve began to form, not loud, not angry, but certain. I had been quiet long enough. Now I would listen, watch, and prepare, because silence, when used wisely, isn't surrender. It's strategy waiting for truth to reveal itself. And soon, that truth would come to me through a name I hadn't heard in years, Frank Alden. The following Monday arrived gray and heavy, the kind of morning when even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. I poured my tea and sat near the window, watching the mist hover above the garden. The phone rang just as I lifted the cup to my lips. It was Tom. "You were right," he said without greeting. "There's been a series of filings involving a notary named Frank Alden. His name keeps showing up in Benico Sato's recent property transfers. One of the addresses listed is yours, Cora." I felt the warmth drain from the tea before I could swallow. "Mine? Are you certain?" "Positive. Nothing official has been recorded yet, but he's been preparing drafts, preliminary transfers, title documents. It looks like someone's been getting ready to move your property on paper." My throat tightened. "Without my consent?" He sighed. "That's what I'm checking. Don't panic. It could be an early forgery attempt, or just paperwork waiting for your signature. But it's strange." I thanked him and hung up, my hand trembling slightly as I set the phone down. The kettle clicked behind me, breaking the silence. I realized that panic wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was something colder, a clarity that came only when love collided with betrayal. Later that day, I saw Diane standing by her mailbox. She waved me over, eyes bright with urgency. "Cora, I have to tell you something." "What is it?" "I was downtown this morning," she said, lowering her voice. "I saw that woman again, Evelyn, and she was with a man I didn't recognize. They were sitting outside the cafe near the courthouse. He had a briefcase, slick hair, nervous smile. I overheard her say your last name." "Did she mention mine or Gavin's?" "Yours," Diane said firmly. "She was giving him instructions about documents. I caught part of it. Backdate," she said, and then something about signing before the wedding." I felt my pulse thrum in my ears. "Backdate?" "That's what I heard." Diane looked worried. "Are you sure everything's okay?" I forced a smile. "It will be. Thank you, Diane." When I returned inside, I stood for a long moment near the hallway mirror. My reflection looked composed, but I could see the faint tremor in my hands. I walked to the study and took out Samuel's old leather notebook. Inside, I wrote one word in the center of the page: Frank. By afternoon, I decided to do what I'd always taught my students: follow the words until they tell you the truth. I searched for Frank Alden, Notary, California, and found a handful of results. Quiet man, 20 years of experience, a small office near Main Street. There was also an old article about disciplinary reviews, allegations of improper filings, bribery whispers, all dismissed for lack of evidence. I called Marta Alvarez, the attorney Harper had once recommended. Her voice was calm but firm. "That's not a name I like to hear," she said. "He's been flagged before in estate transfers. If Evelyn and Benico are working with him, it's not coincidence, it's strategy." "What can we do?" I asked. "For now, observe. Don't confront. The moment you accuse, they'll hide the trail. But keep any correspondence, any calls, any emails. I'll look into his licensing file." After we hung up, I paced the living room. The floorboards creaked under my steps, as if the house itself shared my unease. Every painting, every photo on the wall seemed to watch me. I realized this wasn't just about property. It was about control. Who had it? Who wanted it? And who deserved it? That evening, I attended a small bridal gathering at Lila's request. She looked tired, her smile stretched too thin. Evelyn was there too, perfectly composed, pearls gleaming beneath the chandelier. When she saw me, her lips curved into what might have been a smile but felt more like a performance. "Cora," she said, her tone syrupy. "I'm so glad you could make it. We've been talking about the future. New beginnings, Fresh starts. I nodded politely. Yes, I've been thinking about those things too. She tilted her head. Oh? Planning any changes yourself? Only small ones, I said, smiling faintly. Sometimes it's good to review old paperwork, make sure everything's in order. Something flickered in her eyes, just for a second, but enough for me to see that she understood. The air between us grew taut, like a thread stretched too far. Lila approached then, saving us both. Mom, Cora, they're doing photos in the next room. Evelyn smiled again, her mask restored. Of course, darling. She turned to me, lowering her voice slightly. I hope you'll trust Gavin to take care of you. He's so proud of what you've built. I looked at her and said softly, That's good to know. I just hope he doesn't mistake pride for love. Her smile faltered, only for a heartbeat. Then she walked away. Later, Diane caught my arm near the door. She's up to something, she whispered. I saw her slip an envelope to that man, the one you asked about, Frank. He didn't even try to hide it. Where? I asked Ed. Near the coat rack. He left right after. I didn't need to see it to believe it. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, one painted with greed and entitlement. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the desk with the old key in my hand, listening to the soft hum of the night. The letter from Samuel lay open beside me, the words blurring in the lamplight. I picked up my pen and wrote another name beneath Frank. This time, Evelyn. Then, under both names, I wrote one simple line. Find proof before they find power. When dawn broke, I called Tom again. I need to know everything about Frank Alden, his connections, his debts, anyone he's worked with recently. Tom's voice was calm but serious. That might take a day or two. Why? What's happening, Cora? Someone's trying to rewrite history, I said quietly, and I can't let them. After the call, I walked out onto the porch. The morning air was cold and sharp, smelling faintly of rain. Across the street, Diane's curtains shifted. She was watching, as she always did. I gave her a small nod, a silent thank you. For the first time, I felt something close to power. Not loud, not angry, but anchored in truth. The kind of strength my husband had trusted me to carry when he was gone. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind. They think silence means surrender. Let's show them it doesn't. Because I had seen enough to know that what was coming next wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be a reckoning. And the first sign of that reckoning would arrive through the person I least expected. Lila, standing at my door, holding proof that would change everything. It was late afternoon when the knock came. The light had already started to fade, casting long, honey-colored shadows through the hallway. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief second, I thought it might be Diane again, coming with more neighborhood whispers. But when I opened the door, I saw Lila standing there, drenched from the rain, her mascara faintly smudged, clutching a small folder against her chest like it might save her life. Lila, I said softly, come in, sweetheart. She hesitated, glancing back toward the street before stepping inside. I'm sorry for showing up like this, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. The rain dripped from her coat onto the floor. I led her to the kitchen and handed her a towel. You're safe here, I said. Whatever it is, we'll handle it. She nodded, pressing the towel to her face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain hitting the roof, steady and rhythmic, like the ticking of a quiet clock. Finally, she slid the folder across the table toward me. These are copies, she said. Emails, text messages, even a draft of a prenup Evelyn sent to Gavin. I found them on his laptop. They've been talking about selling this house before the wedding, behind your back. My hands froze mid-air. I took the folder slowly, opening it with care, as if one wrong move might make the truth vanish. Inside were printed screenshots of messages between Gavin and Evelyn. Words like transfer, signing, equity, profit jumped out at me. I felt my stomach tighten. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked quietly. "Because I can't marry into this," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I love him, but this isn't love. It's manipulation. He doesn't even see it. My mother has been feeding him promises, telling him it's all to protect me, but it's about her pride, not us." I exhaled slowly. "And you?" "I want out," she whispered. "But I needed you to know what they were planning. They've already scheduled a meeting with that notary, Frank Alden, tomorrow." I looked at her, at the panic and exhaustion etched into her young face. She wasn't an enemy. She was another casualty of Evelyn's ambition. "You did the right thing coming here," I said softly. "You're brave, Leela." She shook her head. "I'm terrified." "Courage doesn't mean you're not," I replied. "It just means you came anyway." I took her hand for a moment, steadying her. The warmth of her trembling fingers reminded me of the girl I used to be. Hopeful, uncertain, doing her best to protect what she loved. Then headlights flashed outside. A car pulled into the driveway, tires splashing against the puddles. Lila stiffened. "That's Gavin's car," she whispered. I stood and took a quiet breath. "Stay here." When I opened the door, Gavin was halfway up the steps, his suit soaked, his eyes wild. "Mom, what's going on? Why did Lila run off? She won't answer my calls." "She's inside," I said calmly. He stepped closer. "She's upset about something she thinks she found. Whatever she told you, it's out of context." "Context?" I repeated softly. "That's an interesting word." He ran a hand through his wet hair, glancing past me. "Mom, please. This isn't what it looks like." "Then what is it?" I asked it. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your fiancé is scared. Your mother is confused, and your future mother-in-law is orchestrating something illegal." He flinched at the word. "Illegal? No, it's just a misunderstanding. Evelyn wanted to help with some paperwork, make sure everything's in order before the wedding." "By backdating documents? By forging signatures?" His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence between us stretched. Behind me, I heard Lila's soft voice. "Gavin, stop pretending. I saw the emails." He turned toward her, his face falling. "You went through my computer?" "I had to," she said. "You wouldn't listen. You kept saying your mother would hand over the house anyway. You even printed the drafts." Gavin's jaw clenched. "I was trying to make things easier for us, for our future." "No," I said gently. "You were trying to make things easier for Evelyn." He looked at me, his eyes desperate. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy feeling like a charity case?" She made me believe I was doing the smart thing, that I could finally prove myself. "And did it work?" I asked quietly. "Do you feel proud?" He swallowed hard, tears beginning to form. "I just wanted you to be proud of me, Mom." The room went still. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle. I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who'd show me every drawing, every A- paper, waiting for my approval. That same boy was standing in front of me now, only lost inside a man who'd let pride drown out his better self. "Gavin," I said softly, The only thing I ever wanted was for you to be kind and honest. Not perfect, not rich, just good. He shook his head, stepping back. You don't understand. It's too late. It's never too late, I said. But you have to stop digging. He stared at the folder on the table, the truth staring back at him. His shoulders slumped. I'll fix it, he murmured. I'll talk to Evelyn. Cancel the meeting. Do that, I said. And don't call her tonight. He nodded, eyes red, then turned and walked out without another word. Lila sank into the chair, exhaling shakily. I think he's scared, she said. Good, I replied softly. Fear can make people pause before they do more harm. After she left, I sat alone at the table, the folder still open. The words on those pages burned into me, not because of their malice, but because of how close they had come to reality. I picked up the phone and dialed Marta. It's time, I said. I have proof, and I'm done being quiet. Her voice was steady. Understood. I'll assemble a legal team. We'll bring Noah in for evidence collection. You've done the hardest part. What's that? Seeing the truth without running from it. When I hung up, I went to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving small drops clinging to the glass like scattered beads of light. The reflection staring back at me was calm, determined, ready. I picked up the brass key from the counter and slipped it into my pocket. Whatever came next, I would face it not as a mother desperate to hold on, but as a woman ready to protect what was rightfully hers. Tomorrow, Marta and Noah would arrive, and the quiet house that once echoed with my husband's laughter would become the place where justice began. The morning after Gavin's visit began with a strange stillness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I woke before sunrise and stood by the kitchen window, watching the fog drift across the vineyard hills in the distance. The brass key felt cold in my palm, grounding me in reality. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't unsure of what to do. The decision had already been made last night when I called Marta. At exactly 9 o'clock, her silver sedan pulled into my driveway. She stepped out, crisp and calm, holding a leather portfolio against her chest. Behind her came a tall man in a dark jacket, camera slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the property with the quiet precision of someone used to noticing what others ignored. Cora, Marta greeted me, offering a hand. This is Noah Price. He'll be assisting us. Private investigator. He used to work with the FBI before he opened his own firm. I shook Noah's hand. His grip was firm, his expression unreadable. Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. I've read a brief summary of your situation. We'll find out what's being done behind your back, and by whom. I'm not interested in vengeance, I said. Just protection. That's exactly what we specialize in, he replied. We settled in the living room, the morning light spilling across the wooden floors. Marta opened her portfolio and spread several documents across the coffee table. Draft trust forms, affidavit templates, a checklist for asset transfers. I've reviewed your late husband's estate filings, she said. Everything is clean. You hold the title outright. That means any attempt to move it without your written consent is fraud. But to prevent interference, we'll take a defensive step. Place the house into an irrevocable living trust, with Harper Willis as sole trustee. You'll remain the primary beneficiary. I nodded slowly. That's what Samuel and Harper discussed years ago, before he passed. Marta smiled slightly. Your husband was a prudent man. Now it's time to finish what he started. Noah sat quietly, taking notes. Then he asked, Do you have any communication with Evelyn or the notary? Only through Gavin, I said. Evelyn doesn't speak to me directly. She prefers whispers through others. He nodded. That's her mistake. Whispers leave trails. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small recorder. With your permission, I'll start documenting phone calls, digital activity, and any contact between your son and Evelyn's associates. Everything we collect will be time-stamped and legally admissible. I hesitated, the weight of it pressing against my chest. Will Gavin be charged? Only if he continues knowingly, Marta said gently. We're not building a case to destroy him. We're building one to stop her. The relief that washed through me was subtle but real. I had no desire to punish my son. I just wanted the noise to end. Tom arrived shortly after, carrying a folder of bank statements. We've rerouted your retainer through my office, he explained. That way, no one outside this circle will see where the funds are going. Good, Marta said. Discretion is everything. Once Harper finalizes the trustee paperwork, we'll execute the transfer quietly. No public record until it's sealed. I watched them all, the attorney, the investigator, the advisor, working together with seamless precision. It struck me how different their world was from mine. I'd spent decades teaching students how to read between lines of poetry. Now I was learning to read between lines of law. At one point, Noah stepped outside to take a few photos of the property, angles of the mailbox, the lock on the front door, even the notary seal on an old envelope left in my file cabinet. When he returned, he said, "We'll need to establish visual documentation that everything here is untouched. That way, if someone tries to submit a forged claim, we can prove continuity." Marta nodded approvingly. Perfect. We'll also need your signature on a power of attorney clause, limited use, just for legal defense. It ensures no one can trick you into signing anything else under pressure. I signed without hesitation. For the first time since my husband's passing, the act of putting pen to paper didn't feel like loss. It felt like reclaiming control. Before they left, Marta paused by the doorway. Cora, once we start this process, you may hear rumors. People might say you're paranoid or ungrateful. Let them. The law is quiet but thorough. I smiled faintly. Quiet seems to be my language lately. She nodded, her eyes kind. Then you'll do well. After they left, I sat on the porch and let the afternoon wind wash over me. The house seemed lighter somehow, as if it knew it was finally being defended. I could almost hear Samuel's voice again. You'll know when to move, Cora. You always do. That evening, Harper called to confirm he'd received Marta's draft. It's solid, he said. We'll file discreetly. No one outside this trust will have access. The deed will be untouchable. Thank you, Harper, I said. Samuel would have trusted you with this. I know, he said quietly, and I don't take that lightly. After the call, I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out the kitchen window. The garden lights flickered on one by one. For a brief moment, I imagined the life I once had. Laughter in the hallways, music from the radio, my husband humming along off-key. But the quiet that followed wasn't painful anymore. It was purposeful. I picked up my notebook and wrote a single line. Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes, you have to open the door yourself. Then I added the date and closed it gently. Tomorrow, Noah would begin the evidence collection. Marta would file the retainer. Harper would sign as trustee. The plan was in motion. And somewhere out there, Evelyn still believed she was 2 steps ahead. But she didn't know I'd already chosen silence as my shield. By the time Noah returned 3 days later, the rhythm of my days had changed. I moved slower. But every action felt deliberate. Every drawer closed carefully. Every light switch flicked with purpose. The calm before a storm always feels ordinary to outsiders. Only the person standing in the middle of it can hear the tremor beneath the quiet. Noah arrived just after sunrise, his camera bag slung across his shoulder, a cup of black coffee in hand. Marta followed half an hour later, carrying a manila envelope marked evidence log. The air between them was professional but tense, like people who had both seen too much of human weakness to be surprised by anything. "We've made progress," Noah said as soon as he stepped inside. Frank Alden received an unregistered payment from a shell company 2 weeks ago. The transfer originated from an account under the name Morgan Renovations, LLC. I frowned. Morgan, Evelyn's last name. He nodded. Exactly. The company was formed 3 months ago, no listed address, just a post office box. It's a front. And Frank deposited the payment within an hour of receiving it. Marta placed a tablet on the table, pulling up scanned photos. Noah managed to photograph the handoff. Cash envelope, dated receipt. It's not conclusive proof of intent yet, but paired with the email thread we intercepted, it's strong. "What email thread?" I asked. She turned the tablet toward me. There, in neat black text, was a message from Benico to Evelyn. "Frank will finalize once the client signs. Will ensure the backdate aligns with engagement week." The words blurred slightly as I stared at them. I could hear my husband's voice in my head again, calm but certain. "Protect our blood, not our pride." "They're confident," Marta said quietly. "Too confident. That's their mistake." Noah pulled out a folder from his bag and spread photos across the table. In one, Frank stood outside a cafe, an envelope half tucked into his coat. Another showed him meeting Benico at a gas station, looking around before sliding something into her purse. In the last image, he was inside his car, holding a document that looked suspiciously like a property transfer form. "These were taken over 2 days," Noah explained. "We'll cross-reference the timestamps with bank statements. Once we have confirmation of timing, we can prove coordination. It's enough to freeze any attempt at filing." I looked at the photos, feeling both vindicated and heavy. There was no satisfaction in being right about betrayal, only sadness that it had come to this. Marta began cataloging everything. "We'll attach the financial records, Noah's photographic evidence, and your own testimony about the conversation with Diane. If needed, Diane can appear as a witness." "She would," I said softly. "She saw more than she meant to." Marta smiled faintly. "Good neighbors make good witnesses." Noah stepped outside again, saying he needed new vantage shots. I watched through the window as he moved with silent precision, photographing tire tracks near the mailbox, the lock on the front gate, the edges of the property line. I wondered how many times he had done this before, for how many quiet people who had trusted the wrong hands. While he worked, Marta stayed inside with me, reviewing statements. "Gavin's been quiet," I said finally. "No calls, no messages. Do you think he knows?" "He suspects," she replied. "But he doesn't have proof. That's what Evelyn's counting on, keeping him blind until she's done using his name." I stirred my tea, the spoon clinking softly against the cup. "She's clever, I'll give her that." "Clever," Marta said, "but not wise. There's a difference." By noon, Noah came back inside, laying out new prints still warm from his portable printer. He pointed to one. "This is key. See the reflection in the cafe window? That's Evelyn's car. We can match the license plate to the payment date." Marta's eyes lit up. "That's the chain we needed. Bank transfer, cash handoff, and physical presence. This ties all three together. What happens next? I asked, and next, Marta said, we secure everything. Noah will create duplicates, encrypted and timestamped. You'll sign an affidavit verifying the authenticity of these materials. Once that's done, we can file an emergency motion to protect your assets if they attempt anything before the trust finalizes. It sounded clinical, but I knew the gravity behind every word. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a fortress being built around the life Samuel and I had spent decades constructing. That evening, when they left, the house was quiet again, but different. The silence now felt alive, humming with preparation instead of fear. I lit a single candle by the window and sat watching it flicker. A message from Gavin appeared on my phone. Dinner soon? We should talk. I read it twice, then placed the phone face down. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The truth had to be complete before I faced him. The next morning, Marta called. We're ready to move on the trust. Harper will need your signature. The paperwork will make the deed legally untransferable under any marital or third-party claim. Once it's sealed, no one can touch it. Not even your son without your approval. I stood by the window, watching the sunrise stretch across the lawn. Then it's time, I said. Are you sure? Yes, I whispered. It's not revenge. It's protection. And sometimes protection has to be quiet to work. When the call ended, I went to my drawer and took out the velvet pouch. The brass key gleamed faintly in the morning light. I turned it between my fingers, feeling its worn edges. For years, it had opened every door in this house. Now it would lock one thing for good: the future of what Samuel and I built. Tomorrow, I would meet Harper to move the deed into trust. And by the time Gavin stood at the altar bragging about his inheritance, he would find that the house he claimed had quietly slipped beyond his reach. The morning I went to meet Harper, the air carried the scent of rain and cut grass. The kind of scent that makes you feel like the world is being quietly washed clean. I woke early, dressed in my soft gray sweater, and placed the brass key in my pocket. It clicked against the wooden drawer as I shut it, a small sound that felt ceremonial, like a promise being sealed. Harper's office sat at the edge of town, an old brick building with ivy creeping along its walls. When I walked in, he was already waiting, the familiar warmth in his eyes that I remembered from Samuel's days still there. His desk was orderly, papers stacked with precision, a single fountain pen gleaming under the light. "Good morning, Cora," he said. "I have everything prepared. We'll make this official today." I nodded. "Let's finish it." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside was the deed, the same one Samuel and I signed years ago, now accompanied by new pages, trust clauses, beneficiary designations, trustee acknowledgments. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal at the bottom of the page. "Once you sign here," Harper said, tapping the document, "this property will belong to the trust. You remain the lifetime beneficiary, and after you, the assets will go toward the preservation fund you mentioned." "I'd like part of it to support the local shelter," I said. "Samuel always believed the house should protect more than just us." He smiled. "That's a noble clause. I'll include it." The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed. The moment the ink touched paper, a strange calm filled me. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was release. The kind that comes when you stop holding your breath after too long. Harper added his own signature as trustee and closed the folder carefully. "It's done," he said. "From this moment, the house is legally protected. No sale, transfer, or claim can affect it. Even a marriage can't override the trust." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you, Harper." He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "Samuel would be proud. You handled this the right way, quietly, firmly, with dignity." "I learned from the best," I said softly. He handed me a copy of the trust, neatly sealed in a brown envelope. "Keep this somewhere safe. I'll file the originals by end of day. And Cora," he hesitated, "prepare yourself. People don't react kindly when control slips away." "I'm ready," I said. Silence doesn't mean weakness. After leaving his office, I stopped by the small park across the street. The air was cool, the benches damp from the morning rain. I sat under the old oak tree where Samuel and I used to have lunch on Sundays. I opened my purse, took out the brass key, and held it against the envelope. It was symbolic, I knew, a gesture no one else would understand. But it mattered. The house was safe, and with it, a piece of our story. When I returned home, Maggie was waiting on the porch with a thermos of coffee. "You did it," she said, her voice soft. "I did," I replied. "It's in the trust now, irrevocable." She smiled. "I'm proud of you." We sat for a while, watching the clouds break apart. The afternoon sun began to filter through, warm and steady. For the first time in months, I felt peace settle in. Later that evening, I heard laughter echoing faintly from my son's social media video. Diane had shown me how to view them, though I rarely did. This one stopped me cold. Gavin stood in a crowded restaurant, a glass of champagne in hand, grinning at his friends. Lila sat beside him, smiling politely, her eyes distant. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of Evelyn, perfectly composed, her hand resting on Gavin's shoulder like she owned him. In the clip, Gavin raised his glass and said, "Well, we don't have to worry about housing after the wedding. I'll be inheriting Mom's house anyway." The room in the video erupted with laughter and applause. He laughed too, not seeing how fragile that confidence looked to those who knew better. I closed my eyes, letting the sound fade. I could almost feel Samuel's presence beside me, calm as always. "He's still learning, Cora. Let him. You've done your part." That night, I placed the signed trust documents inside the safe under the stairs. The brass key lay beside them, its surface catching the faint glow of the porch light through the window. I whispered, "You're safe now." When I went to bed, I slept soundly for the first time in a long while. The storm outside didn't bother me. The thunder was distant, the rain steady but gentle. It felt like the house was breathing again. A week remained before the wedding. The invitations were already out, the preparations in full swing. Gavin texted me late one night, asking if I would say a few words at the reception. I told him I would. It wasn't the time to argue. Still, beneath his message, I noticed something that made me pause. It wasn't his words. It was the image he posted a few minutes later. A photo of him holding a glass of wine. Captioned, "The future looks bright." The background gave him away. It wasn't his apartment. It was my living room. He had taken the photo here, without asking, while I was away. I stared at the image for a long time before setting the phone down. A quiet resolve settled in me again. The house might be protected, but this wasn't over. Not yet. The next steps would come soon. The backlash, the denial, the smear. I could already sense the noise rising again, the kind that tries to drown truth before it surfaces. But this time, I wasn't afraid of the noise. I had learned that the loudest storms often break themselves against the quietest walls. And my walls were stronger now. The peace that followed didn't last long. By midweek, the phone calls started. First, it was Diane, her voice uneasy. "Cora, have you seen the posts?" she asked. "Gavin's been saying things online. Not cruel exactly, but strange." I opened my laptop and scrolled. There it was, my son's smiling face on social media, the caption beneath it dripping with subtle bitterness. Some people can't let go of the past, even when it's time to move forward. But I guess everyone deals with pride differently. I read it twice, my hand still. The words were public, vague enough to seem harmless but pointed enough to invite speculation. The comments poured in from family friends, neighbors, even old students of mine. "She's always been stubborn. Poor Gavin. He means well. Mothers can be difficult when it comes to letting go." I closed the laptop gently. Silence, I reminded myself, is a strategy, not surrender. But the whispers grew louder. Evelyn had begun weaving her own narrative. At the salon, at the cafe, at every little corner of our small town, she told anyone who'd listen that I was becoming forgetful, that I'd made irrational financial decisions out of paranoia. She hinted that I'd been manipulated by opportunistic lawyers, that Gavin only wanted to help me. The audacity of it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so insidious. Within 2 days, people who used to wave from their porches now looked away. The isolation felt familiar, but this time, it didn't sting. I'd been underestimated before. It was how I learned to win quietly. Marta called that afternoon. "We expected this," she said. "Evelyn's trying to create noise to distract from her own tracks. Don't engage. Let us handle it." "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm disappointed. They're trying to make me doubt myself." "That's her method," Marta said gently. "Gaslight the victim, control the story. But we have proof, Cora. We stay the course." Noah arrived later with updates. He carried a small audio recorder in his coat pocket and a folder of printed transcripts. "We intercepted a call between Evelyn and Frank," he said. "She's panicking." She told him to accelerate before the trust seals, which tells us she doesn't realize it's already done. "She thinks she still has time," I said quietly. "Exactly," Noah replied. "And that's her mistake." He played a short clip from the recorder. Evelyn's voice came through, sharp but trembling. "Gavin's too emotional. I told him to stop posting, but he wants validation. If she talks to a judge first, we're finished." Noah clicked it off. "That's admissible. She's acknowledging intent to manipulate legal filings. Once we corroborate with bank records, it's over." But even knowing that, my heart ached for Gavin. His silence toward me wasn't anger, it was confusion. He'd been pulled into a web that blurred love and control. That night, Lila called. "He's different," she said softly. "He barely sleeps. Evelyn keeps pushing him to file something, some kind of petition to review your mental state. He says it's just a precaution, but I think she's planning to make it public." My stomach dropped. "A competency petition?" "Yes," she whispered. "I saw the draft on her desk. It accuses you of being manipulated by an outside party and unfit to manage your estate. She's using your age as her weapon." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "All right," I said. "If that's how she wants to play, then we'll respond properly." The next morning, Marta came over, her expression grave. "We received the petition notice. Evelyn filed it late last night through her attorney. It's weak, but it exists. Don't worry, we'll handle it." "Do I need to appear?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "We'll have a social worker perform an independent assessment first. I already contacted someone trustworthy." That evening, a woman named Janet Weller arrived at my door. a calm, kind-eyed social worker in her 50s. She spoke gently, respectfully, not like an investigator, but like someone taking care of an old friend. "I've read the claims," Janet said, setting her notebook down. "I can tell you already, there's no concern here. You're articulate, coherent, and you've handled your affairs impeccably. But we'll go through the motions for the record." We talked for over an hour about my late husband, my teaching years, my garden. By the end, she smiled. "They underestimated you, Mrs. Bennett. I'll be submitting my report tomorrow. You have nothing to worry about." When she left, the house felt warm again. The storm was still outside, but inside there was light. That night, I sat at the desk, opened my notebook, and wrote 3 lines beneath the date. They wanted noise. I'll give them silence. They wanted doubt. I'll give them proof. They wanted control. I'll show them what freedom looks like. The next day, Diane knocked on my door. "I thought you should know," she said, handing me her phone. There on the screen was a video Gavin had posted. His voice defensive, his eyes red. "People are misunderstanding things," he said. "My mom's not well. She's surrounded by people who are taking advantage of her. We're trying to help her before it's too late." My breath caught, not because of the accusation, but because of how frightened he looked. Evelyn was behind the camera. I could sense it. Every word he spoke was rehearsed, coached. I sat down slowly. "He's in deeper than I thought." Diane placed a hand on my shoulder. "He'll see the truth eventually. You just have to hold your ground." I nodded. I've been doing that my whole life. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't break. I brewed a cup of tea, turned off the lights, and sat by the window watching the moonlight touch the porch steps. The key lay beside me, the cool brass pressing against my palm. The next morning, Marta called. "Noah caught something big. He followed Frank to a diner. There's a recording. You'll want to hear it." Her voice carried the restrained excitement of someone standing at the edge of victory. "What did he say?" I asked. "He confessed, Cora. He admitted to backdating the documents for Evelyn. It's over." I looked toward the garden, where the morning sun had just begun to rise. The house glowed under the light, steadfast, untouched, exactly as it should be. The smear campaign had failed. The lies were starting to unravel. And now, the evidence we'd gathered was ready to speak louder than Evelyn ever could. The time for silence was ending. The truth was ready to take the floor. The day began with the kind of cold sunlight that sharpens everything it touches. I woke early, unable to shake the thought that something final was about to happen. The trust was sealed. The lies had been aired. And now all that remained was to watch the truth climb out of the dark where it had been buried. Noah arrived just after breakfast. He carried his camera case, a folder, and the small silver recorder that had become our quiet weapon. He placed it on the table with deliberate care. "This," he said, tapping the device, "is what we needed." Marta followed moments later, her tone brisk but calm. "We verified the audio. It's genuine, unedited, and time-stamped. Frank Alden confessed on tape to falsifying documents at Evelyn Morgan's request." The house seemed to exhale. I could feel the air shift, the same way it does when a thunderstorm finally breaks after a long, suffocating heat. Noah pressed play. Frank's voice came through, low and weary. "Yeah, I backdated the transfer. Evelyn paid cash, said it was just to make things cleaner before the marriage. I told her it was risky, but she insisted. I needed the money. I didn't think she'd push it this far." Then a pause. The faint scrape of silverware. the murmur of a diner in the background. She said the old woman wouldn't notice, that it would be a simple swap. My throat tightened. Old woman. He had meant me, but there was no pain in hearing it, only clarity. Marta let the recording run another minute before turning it off. "That's enough," she said. "We'll present this to the court as a verified confession. Combined with the bank transfers and Benico's emails, it's airtight." "What happens next?" I asked. "Today," she said, "we file for an emergency injunction. The moment the judge signs it, all transfers connected to your property, trust, or financial accounts are legally frozen. They can't touch anything." Noah added, "We'll also file a motion for investigation under fraud and coercion statutes. The case will shift from civil to potential criminal grounds." It was strange how quiet victory could sound. No applause, no celebration. Just the quiet hum of justice putting on its shoes. Marta handed me a copy of the motion. "You'll need to sign here, authorizing me to act on your behalf. Once the clerk stamps it, Evelyn's side won't be able to access a single document." I signed slowly, each stroke deliberate. "When will she find out?" "Probably within the hour," Noah said. "The freeze will trigger notifications to every party listed in the fraudulent transfer. She'll panic." "Good," I said softly. Panic reveals character. After they left for the courthouse, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the kitchen window, listening to the steady ticking of the clock. I thought about Samuel again, about how he used to say the universe has its own way of balancing scales, slow, quiet, precise. Around noon, Marta called. "It's done," she said. "The injunction is approved. The assets are frozen. The court has ordered all relevant parties to cease financial action until further review." "We did it, Cora." "Thank you," I whispered. "You'll receive a formal notice later today. Noah's staying nearby in case they try anything impulsive." That afternoon, the mail arrived. Among the usual bills and flyers was a certified envelope stamped by the county clerk. Inside was the official notice. Temporary restraining order granted. All transfers suspended. The words looked like poetry to me, clean, unadorned, true. Diane stopped by soon after, holding a basket of muffins. "I heard some folks talking at the cafe," she said, lowering her voice. "Apparently Evelyn got some kind of legal notice this morning. She made a scene, stormed out, shouting about betrayal and conspiracies." I smiled faintly. "Then it's working." "She'll come after you harder now," Diane warned. "I know," I said, "but she'll be shouting at walls she can't climb anymore." That evening, I stood on the porch watching the sunset bleed across the sky. For the first time in months, the house felt alive again. Every window glowed warm. Every board, every nail, every piece of history was safe. Then the phone rang. It was Gavin. His voice was shaky. "Mom, what did you do? Evelyn's furious. She says you ruined everything." "I protected what was already mine," I said quietly. "She says you set her up." "I didn't set anyone up," I interrupted. "She built her own trap and stepped inside it." He didn't respond right away. I could hear his breath on the other end, quick and uneven. "I don't understand anymore," he whispered. "She said it was for us." "She said that because she needed you to believe it," I replied. "Son, sometimes people who claim they're protecting you are really just protecting their pride." He said nothing, only breathed heavily. Then, finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." My voice softened. "You don't have to be sorry yet. Just be honest when the truth reaches you. That will be enough." After we hung up, I looked out at the darkening yard. A single light glowed in the upstairs window. Samuel's old study, the room where he once drafted lesson plans and letters. I imagined him sitting there now, his voice calm, saying what he always said when life got complicated. Just keep your hands clean and your heart steady. The rest will sort itself out. Later that night, Marta texted, "Court date scheduled for next week. We'll present the full case. Audio, financials, witnesses. You've already won the truth, Cora. Now we make it official." I placed my phone face down and exhaled slowly. The wind outside had quieted, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves. I walked through the house, touching the door frames, the walls, the furniture Samuel had built by hand. Each one seemed to hum with gratitude, like they knew they'd been spared. The next day would mark the final stretch toward justice. Evelyn's mask would crack, the evidence would rise, and my silence would finally speak for itself. I turned off the lights, leaving the porch lamp burning low. The brass key rested on the kitchen counter, reflecting the faint glow. I traced its outline with my finger and whispered, "It's almost over." What I didn't yet know was that before it ended, Gavin would return, not as an enemy, but as a son searching for redemption. And that redemption would come with a price neither of us expected. It was 3 days after the injunction when Gavin finally came back to the house. The morning light had barely touched the porch when his car rolled into the driveway, slow and hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. I watched from the kitchen window, my tea cooling untouched beside me. He sat behind the wheel for nearly 5 minutes before stepping out, the same boyish uncertainty in his walk that used to make me soften, no matter what he'd done. When I opened the door, he looked smaller somehow, tired, eyes rimmed red, his voice low. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside. "Of course." He followed me into the kitchen, glancing around as if the walls might accuse him. "I didn't come here to fight," he began. "I just wanted to apologize. For everything. For the things I said online. For the pressure about the house. For trusting the wrong people." The words fell from his mouth in a rush, heavy with practiced remorse, but not entirely hollow. I studied him quietly, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes silence reveals more than questions ever could. "I know I hurt you," he continued. "And I've been thinking a lot about what Dad would say if he were here. He'd be disappointed in me." I set my teacup down gently. "He'd want you to take responsibility," I said. "But he'd never stop loving you." Gavin's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve that." "Love isn't about deserving," I replied. "It's about truth, and truth doesn't disappear just because we ignore it." He nodded, wiping his face. "I've been meeting with Lila. She's furious with me, but she said something that stuck. She said I lost myself trying to impress people who only saw what I could offer, not who I was." He gave a shaky laugh. "She's right." "She is," I said softly. "I want to make things right," he said. "I told Evelyn I'm done. I posted a public apology online this morning. I deleted everything. I told everyone I lied about you being unwell." I felt a flicker of relief, but I didn't let it show. "That's a start." He smiled weakly. "I mean it this time. No more schemes, no more lies. I want you to trust me again." For a moment, I almost did. His voice trembled with sincerity. His shoulders slumped like a man who'd finally dropped the burden of pride. I reached out and squeezed his hand. "Then prove it, Gavin. Not with words, with time." He nodded. "I will." We talked for another hour, about childhood memories, about Lila, about how grief makes people desperate. It felt almost peaceful, like the echo of what used to be. When he finally left, I stood on the porch and watched his car disappear down the road. For the first time in months, I thought maybe we could heal. But that night, the illusion shattered. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from Noah. "Call me as soon as you can. It's urgent." My heart tightened. I dialed immediately. "Noah?" "Cora," he said. His voice clipped. "I need you to hear this from me before you see it somewhere else. Gavin met with Benico this evening." I went cold. "That can't be right. He was here this morning." "I'm looking at the footage now," Noah said. "It's from the restaurant downtown. He was there for 45 minutes. Benico handed him a folder. They left separately, but she called Evelyn right after. We have the recording." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He said he ended it. He said he told her everything was over. "I know," Noah said gently, "but she's still manipulating him. It looks like they're trying to retrieve or duplicate documents before the court date." My knees felt weak. I sank into the chair by the window, staring into the dark. "He doesn't even realize he's being used," I whispered. "No," Noah said, "but Evelyn does. And she's counting on his guilt to make him desperate enough to help her." I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my breath. The betrayal didn't sting the way it once would have. It felt more like an ache I'd already made peace with. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "We'll handle it," Noah replied. "Marta's preparing an update for the judge. The injunction holds, so they can't act on anything. But we need to stay alert." After the call, I sat there in silence, the brass key glinting under the faint porch light. I turned it over and over in my hand, the metal cool against my skin. My son's apology still echoed in my mind, but now it sounded hollow, like words spoken from a script written by someone else. The next morning, the world carried on as usual. Birds chirped, the mail truck passed, neighbors waved, but beneath it, I could feel the subtle shift, the calm before another wave. Lila came by later that afternoon, her eyes tired but resolute. "He told me he apologized to you," she said quietly. "He did." "But then he disappeared for hours," she continued. "When he came home, he was defensive again. I asked Gidebolten where he'd been, and he said he just needed air. I didn't believe him." I sighed. He's still trapped between her promises and his own shame. Lila nodded slowly. "I love him, but I can't fix him. Not like this." "No," I said softly. "He has to fix himself. The truth will do that better than guilt ever could." That night, as the sun set behind the hills, I walked through the house, running my fingers along the old wooden banisters Samuel had built. I thought about how many times I'd walked these stairs, how many moments of heartbreak they'd witnessed, and how they'd always held firm beneath my feet. When I reached the top, I paused outside Samuel's study. I could almost hear his voice again, low and patient. "Even when people you love stumble, Cora, don't lose your footing. That's how you help them find theirs." Downstairs, my phone buzzed again. Marta this time. Judge advanced the hearing to Friday. They're calling it early resolution. Evelyn's panic is showing. I replied, "Good. Let the truth come early too." Before I went to bed, I placed the brass key on my nightstand beside a small photograph of Gavin as a child, his smile wide, his eyes unburdened. I whispered, "You'll find your way back someday, but not by walking through me." The house was silent again, but this silence felt different. It wasn't fragile or fearful anymore. It was steady, like the calm heartbeat before a verdict. I knew the next time I saw Evelyn and Gavin together, The truth would no longer hide behind polished words and rehearsed apologies. The courtroom would strip everything down to fact and motive. And when that moment came, silence would no longer be my strategy. It would be my witness. The morning of the wedding began with sunlight that felt almost cruel in its brightness. I stood in front of the mirror, fastening the small pearl earrings Samuel gave me on our 10th anniversary. They dulled slightly with time, but they still carried the quiet shimmer of something honest. I took one last look at my reflection and whispered, "Let's see this through, Sam." The ceremony was held at the hillside estate Evelyn had rented, all white tents and silver ribbons. Guests in pale linen and pastel dresses drifted across the manicured lawn, champagne flutes already in hand. I arrived alone, as I always did, walking past whispers that softened when I drew near. Some smiled politely, others looked away. They'd all heard Evelyn's stories. Today, they would hear mine, without me saying a word. I found my seat near the aisle. Lila stood under the archway, radiant but trembling, her bouquet clutched a little too tightly. Gavin stood beside her, handsome and hollow-eyed, his smile stiff. Evelyn hovered near the front row, her clutch bag tucked securely under her arm, pearls gleaming like armor. The officiant began. Words about love and trust floated through the air, sweet and heavy like perfume. I watched Gavin, watched how his fingers fidgeted against his cufflinks, how his eyes flicked toward Evelyn for reassurance instead of toward Lila. The wind picked up just enough to send a few flower petals drifting across the ground, soft reminders that beauty can fall apart gracefully. When the vows ended and the applause began, Marta caught my eye from the back row. She gave a small nod. It was time. During the reception, the mood was buoyant, the music loud. Guests clinked glasses. Photographers buzzed like flies. Gavin and Lila posed for photos near the fountain while Evelyn basked in the glow of social approval she'd fought so hard to keep. Her laughter carried across the lawn, bright and brittle. Then, amid the chatter, a courier approached the tent entrance. He held a thick envelope marked Certified Delivery. His eyes scanned the crowd before landing on Evelyn Morgan. "Mrs. Evelyn Morgan?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. She blinked, startled. "Yes?" He handed her the envelope. "Delivery for you. Court notice." The noise around us dimmed, as though someone had turned down the volume of the world. Evelyn took the envelope slowly, her manicured fingers trembling. She forced a smile, trying to laugh it off, but her knuckles were white. Marta stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, calm as ever. "That's a certified legal notice," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. "Filed under civil fraud and coercion. You might want to open it." Evelyn's face drained of color. "This is inappropriate," she hissed. "Today is a family celebration." "Family," Marta said evenly, "is exactly why it's being delivered today." Guests began whispering, turning their heads, curious and confused. Gavin froze where he stood, his champagne glass trembling in his hand. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "Maybe you should read it, Mom," Lila said quietly, stepping closer. Evelyn fumbled with the envelope, ripping it open. Her eyes darted across the pages, then stopped. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The color in her cheeks vanished completely. "What does it say?" Gavin asked again, louder this time. Marta stepped closer, her tone measured. "It says all property transfers involving your mother and Mrs. Bennett's estate have been frozen by court order. It also includes an affidavit from a notary admitting to falsified documents. The evidence names your mother, Mr. Alden, and Mrs. Sato as participants. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The music faltered and stopped. Cameras were raised. Murmurs turned sharp. Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice broke. "This is absurd. Lies. Malicious lies." From across the room, Noah approached quietly, holding up a small recording device. "The audio confession was verified this morning," he said. "Your notary was quite talkative once he realized the FBI would be reviewing his transactions." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward Gavin, wild and panicked. "Do something," she hissed, but Gavin didn't move. His face had gone slack with disbelief, his eyes locked on me. "Mom, what is this?" I held his gaze gently. "It's the truth, Gavin. The truth your father would have protected, and the one I couldn't let die." He looked down, his jaw trembling. The crowd's whispers grew louder, circling him like bees. Evelyn's voice cracked as she turned toward the guests. "This woman, she's trying to ruin us." "No," I said quietly, stepping forward, my voice calm but carrying. "I stayed quiet while you plotted in my shadow. I stayed quiet when you called me unstable, when you used my son's love as leverage. But quiet doesn't mean powerless. It just means patient." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Cameras flashed again, capturing Evelyn's trembling hands as she clutched her clutch bag. Marta raised an eyebrow. "If you're going to deny it, Evelyn, you might want to check your bag first." Evelyn blinked, confused. "What?" Marta nodded to Lila, who reached over gently, almost apologetically, and opened her mother's clutch. Inside, folded neatly, was the original payment receipt. Frank Alden's signature clear as daylight. Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a glass. Evelyn's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand. I did it for you, Gavin. For your future." Lila's voice trembled. "You did it for yourself." Evelyn turned toward her daughter, eyes wide with desperation. "After everything I've given you." But Lila shook her head. "You never gave. You only took." The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Gavin stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "Mom, stop." Evelyn looked at him, confusion and fury mixing behind her tears. But when he stepped back, away from her, something in her broke. The mask she'd worn for years shattered right there in front of everyone. She turned and fled through the crowd, her heels clicking hard against the marble floor, the whispers chasing her all the way out of the tent. The guests dispersed slowly, murmuring apologies and disbelief. Lila stood frozen for a moment before moving toward me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "For everything." I took her hand gently. "It wasn't you who needed to apologize." Gavin approached next. His face was pale, his voice small. "You knew this would happen." "I hoped it wouldn't," I said softly. "But the truth always finds its time." He nodded, eyes glassy, shame settling over him like dust. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by facing it," I said, "and by listening when the truth speaks." The music never resumed that day. Guests left in quiet clusters, the laughter replaced by uneasy silence. The champagne flutes stood half empty, abandoned. The perfect wedding Evelyn had promised became the stage for her undoing. As the sun set, I walked out to the parking lot where the hills glowed in fading light. The wind was cool against my face, and for the first time in months, I felt weightless. Justice didn't roar. It whispered, and its whisper was enough. Tomorrow would bring the courtroom, the evidence, and the verdict. But tonight, I would sleep knowing that the house, my son, and the truth itself were finally free from her shadow. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, an odd mixture of warmth and judgment. I arrived early, dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn to Samuel's memorial years ago. It wasn't a statement of mourning this time. It was armor. Harper met me outside the courtroom doors, his briefcase in one hand and a calm nod in my direction. "Are you ready, Cora?" he asked. "I've been ready for months," I said quietly. Inside, the room buzzed with restrained tension. On one side sat Marta and Noah, surrounded by files, photographs, and audio transcripts. On the other side, Evelyn's attorney shuffled papers while she sat rigid in her chair, every inch of her carefully constructed image cracking under the fluorescent light. Gavin sat behind her, his hands clasped, his face pale and drawn. Lila was across the aisle, her expression steady, unflinching. When the judge entered, the room fell into silence. The sound of his gavel striking once echoed like a clean breath before a confession. "Court is now in session," he said. "Case 23 CV 4217, Bennett versus Morgan et al." Marta stood first, composed and deliberate. "Your Honor, today we present clear evidence of property fraud, document falsification, and coercive interference in an estate belonging to Mrs. Cora Bennett. We'll demonstrate intent through audio testimony, financial trails, and corroborating witnesses." Evelyn's lawyer tried to object, claiming family misunderstanding, but the judge raised a hand. "You'll have your turn. Proceed, Ms. Alvarez." Noah began his testimony. His voice was calm, precise, the kind of tone that makes jurors listen. He described the investigation, the fake shell company, the cash payments, the intercepted emails, the recorded diner confession. Each piece of evidence landed like a measured heartbeat. Then came the recording. Marta pressed play. Frank Alden's voice filled the courtroom, nervous and guilty. "Evelyn told me to backdate the transfer. She said it was harmless, just a shortcut before the wedding. She paid in cash, said the son would inherit anyway." Evelyn flinched visibly. Her lawyer whispered something, but the judge's expression didn't change. Marta continued, sliding printed bank records onto the evidence table. Exhibit B shows the payment from Morgan Renovations, LLC to Frank Alden. Exhibit C shows corresponding deposits matching the timeline of the recorded meeting. Exhibit D, copies of correspondence between Mrs. Morgan and realtor Benico Sato, instructing her to prepare the title change discreetly. The judge reviewed the pages, his brow furrowed. "This appears comprehensive." Marta nodded. "It is. And we have one more witness." Diane walked to the stand, her hands shaking slightly but her voice steady. She told the court about the cafe meeting she'd witnessed, Evelyn handing Frank an envelope, whispering about backdating. She described Evelyn's demeanor, her words, her arrogance. "I wasn't meant to hear it," she said softly. "But I did, and I couldn't stay quiet." When Diane stepped down, Marta gestured toward me. "Your Honor, Mrs. Bennett wishes to make a brief statement." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I stood, my palms smooth against the polished wood of the table. "Your Honor," I began, "I never wanted to be here. I raised my son to believe honesty mattered more than success, and that silence, when used wisely, was not cowardice but strength. I stayed quiet until I realized my silence was being used against me. I came here today not for revenge, but to protect the truth that my husband built with his hands, and that I promised to preserve." The judge listened closely, his expression unreadable. When I sat down, Marta placed her hand briefly over mine. "Beautifully said," she whispered. When it was Evelyn's turn, her lawyer fumbled through a defense built on half-truths and sentiment. My client was acting as any concerned mother would, attempting to safeguard her daughter's future. The judge leaned forward. By falsifying legal documents? The lawyer hesitated. She may have misunderstood the process or exploited it, the judge interrupted. Continue. Evelyn stood abruptly. "I didn't do this for myself," she snapped. "I did it because Cora was being manipulated. She's old, alone, surrounded by people filling her head with nonsense." Her words hung in the air, sharp and echoing. Marta stood calmly. If Mrs. Bennet were confused, she wouldn't have been the one who uncovered every piece of evidence we're presenting here today. The judge exhaled slowly, then turned toward me. "Mrs. Bennet, are you currently under any legal guardianship or advisement limiting your autonomy?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Only good counsel." He nodded once, turning his gaze back to Evelyn. "Then it appears your justification collapses under its own weight." The courtroom went utterly still. After reviewing the final exhibits, the judge leaned back in his chair. "Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that Mrs. Bennet acted lawfully to protect her estate. All contested transfers are hereby voided. The property and all associated assets remain under the trust of Mrs. Bennet and her appointed trustee. Furthermore, evidence of falsified documentation and financial misconduct will be referred to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." The gavel struck once, the sound clean and final. Evelyn's face went white. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently, but she was frozen, eyes fixed on me with something that looked less like hatred and more like disbelief. Gavin sat behind her, staring down at his hands. When the judge left the bench, the courtroom filled with low murmurs. Marta gathered her papers calmly. "It's over," she said. "You won." I shook my head. "No, the truth won." Lila approached quietly, her eyes wet but clear. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing up, for all of us." I smiled faintly. "You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me you'll live differently." She nodded, squeezing my hand before stepping back. Then Gavin stood. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me, tears slipping down his face. There was no anger left, only the weight of understanding. I nodded once, a silent invitation for him to start over when he was ready. As I walked out of the courthouse, the autumn air hit my face like a baptism. The world felt lighter. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The story had already been told, in evidence and silence alike. When I reached the car, I paused, looking back at the courthouse steps. Evelyn sat on the bench, alone now, her head in her hands. I felt no triumph, no hatred, only the quiet ache of pity. Justice had been served, but compassion would have the last word. Tomorrow, Gavin would come home. And when he did, I would be waiting, not as the woman he tried to outmaneuver, but as the mother who refused to stop believing he could still change. The day after the verdict, the house felt different, lighter, as though it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The sunlight fell through the kitchen windows in soft golden patches, glinting off the old brass key that still sat on the counter. For months, that key had been a weapon of silence. Now it was something gentler, something that no longer needed to defend. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and sat by the window, listening to the faint rustle of the vineyard trees beyond the fence. The court order, the headlines, the whispers, All of it had begun to fade into the background noise of other people's lives. The only sound that mattered was the creak of the porch steps when I heard them again. The same careful rhythm I'd known since my son was a boy. Gavin stood at the door, holding his hands in his pockets, looking younger and smaller than he had in years. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale from sleepless nights. When our eyes met, he didn't speak. He simply waited, like a child asking permission to come home. I opened the door. "Come in," I said softly. He stepped inside, eyes flicking around the room as if to make sure it was still here, still ours. "You kept it," he murmured. "It was never gone," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table where so many storms had begun. I poured him tea, and for a long while we just listened to the clock ticking. It was Gavin who broke the silence first. "I don't even know where to start." "Try the truth," I said. He swallowed hard. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said. "I thought I could fix everything Evelyn promised me. Our debts, our future, Lila's happiness. I thought if I proved I could take care of you, you'd finally believe in me again." I looked at him quietly. "You don't prove love by taking. You prove it by protecting." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know that now, but I didn't see it until it was too late. I let her control me. She made me think I was helping you, when all I was doing was helping her destroy what Dad built." His voice broke on the last word. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You're not your mistakes, Gavin. You're what you do after them." Tears fell freely down his cheeks now. "How do I make it right?" I took a deep breath. "Start by facing what's left. Apologize to those you hurt. Fix what can be fixed. And learn to live without expecting forgiveness as payment." He wiped his face and nodded. "I want to. I just..." He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I hate myself for how easily I believed her." "You don't have to hate yourself," I said gently. "Just learn from the mirror she held up to you. You saw what pride looks like when it's dressed as love. Don't wear it again." He nodded slowly, and for a while, we said nothing more. The silence between us was no longer sharp. It was soft, heavy with understanding. When the kettle whistled, I stood and poured another cup. "Do you remember the voicemail from your father?" I asked quietly. He looked up. "The one you always kept on your phone?" I nodded. "I want you to hear it again." I played it through the small speaker, the familiar static hum filling the kitchen before Samuel's calm voice came through. "If you're hearing this, Cora, it means life went as it always does. Messy, unpredictable, but worth every second. Don't let our son forget who he is. Remind him that what's worth keeping is never bought, never forced. It's earned through patience and truth." When it ended, neither of us moved. Gavin's tears came quietly this time. No apologies, no words. He reached for my hand and held it tight. "I think I understand now," he said softly. "He meant me. He was talking about me." I smiled faintly. He was talking about both of us. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a long while, we sat together without speaking. The silence that once divided us now felt like shared ground. Lila came later that afternoon, hesitant but composed. "I didn't know if I should come," she said, "but I needed to say thank you for seeing through what I couldn't." I shook my head. "You don't owe me thanks, Lila. You owe yourself a future." She looked toward Gavin, her expression tender but uncertain. "We both need time," she said. He nodded. "We'll take it." After she left, Gavin and I walked through the vineyard behind the house. The soil was damp, rich, and alive underfoot. The vines stretched endlessly, patient as time itself. I stopped at the edge of the hill and looked out at the land my husband once called his cathedral. "I thought I was saving a house," I said quietly. "But I was really saving this, a place where truth still means something." Gavin stood beside me, his eyes following mine. "I'll help you take care of it," he said. "I know you will," I replied. When we went back inside, the light had turned soft and amber. I took the brass key from the counter and placed it in his palm. "This isn't ownership," I said. "It's a reminder. Everything that matters has weight. Don't carry it lightly." He closed his fingers around it, tears in his eyes. "I won't." That night, after he left, I sat alone on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The house lights glowed warmly through the windows. Diane had sent a message earlier, something short but kind. "The town's proud of you, Cora. Quiet justice wins again." I smiled, tucking the phone away. The crickets hummed. The stars glimmered faintly above the vines, and I felt Samuel's presence everywhere, in the wind, in the quiet, in the peace I'd earned the hard way. I whispered into the night. He bragged. I stayed quiet, and silence did what shouting never could. Tomorrow, I'd meet Marta and Harper to decide the next chapter, how to turn this victory into something lasting, something that could help others. But for now, I just sat there, letting the quiet wrap around me like forgiveness. The following week, the vineyard glowed with that kind of late autumn light that makes everything feel softer, forgiven. The air smelled faintly of earth and oak, and the trees that lined the driveway had begun to turn gold at the edges. I stood on the porch that morning, wrapped in my shawl, holding 2 envelopes, one for the lawyer, one for my son. Both, in their own ways, were endings. Marta arrived first, punctual as always, her heels clicking against the wooden steps. Harper followed soon after, carrying his leather briefcase and a gentle smile. "You look lighter," he said as I welcomed them in. "I am," I replied, "because today we closed this chapter the right way." We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pooling between us. The papers before us weren't about battles or defense this time. They were about legacy. "I've amended the trust," I said. "Half of the residual income from the vineyard will go to a community housing fund. The rest stays here under Harper's care. This house isn't just a home anymore. It's a promise." Marta smiled. "A quiet kind of justice. That's the only kind worth having," I said softly. We reviewed the final documents in silence, the only sound the scratch of pen against paper. When I finished signing, Harper sealed the folder and looked at me. "It's done, Cora. Irrevocable, permanent, exactly as you wanted." I leaned back, exhaling. "Then it's time to live again." After they left, Gavin arrived in the afternoon. He looked healthier, calmer, like someone beginning to find solid ground beneath his feet. He had a small box in his hands. "I wanted to give you this," he said. Inside was a framed photograph of the 3 of us, Samuel, Gavin, and me, taken the summer before Samuel passed. We were standing in front of the vines, laughing, the sunlight catching the dust in the air. It had been years since I'd seen that photo. "I found it in an old album," he said. "I thought maybe it belonged here again." I smiled, my eyes stinging a little. It never stopped belonging here. He sat across from me at the table, the same place where so many hard words had been spoken. This time, his voice was quiet. I've started therapy, he said. I talked to Leela too. She's taking some time for herself, but she said maybe someday we'll try again. That's good, I said. Sometimes people need distance to see what matters. He nodded, eyes cast down. I'm also helping Noah with the community project, the one you're funding. I figured if I'm going to rebuild my name, I should start by building something real. I smiled. I'm proud of you. He laughed softly. You're really saying that? I am. Not because you're perfect, but because you're trying. We talked for a while longer. About the house, about Samuel, about small plans for the coming winter. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. Can I see the key again? He asked. I walked to the counter and picked up the brass key, its surface worn smooth from years of turning in locks. I placed it gently into his palm. This isn't mine to keep anymore, I said, but it isn't yours to own either. It's a reminder about responsibility, not possession. He closed his hand around it and nodded. I understand. I believe you do, I said. Keep it safe, Gavin. One day, when you've built something worth protecting, you'll know what to do with it. He smiled through his tears, kissed my forehead, and left quietly. The door closed behind him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of peace, of memory, of hope. That evening, I walked out to the vineyard with a basket of fruit and the small radio Samuel had once used while working the rows. I sat beneath the oldest oak tree and turned the dial until I found a faint melody, something classical, gentle, timeless. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and the air was cool against my skin. I opened Samuel's last letter, the one I'd read only once before, and read it again under the fading light. If our son ever loses his way, don't meet him with anger, Cora. Meet him with steadiness. The world will teach him the rest. I smiled through my tears. It did, Sam. In its own way, it did. When I stood, I looked back at the house, our house. It wasn't just wood and stone anymore. It was a living story, a story of silence that turned into strength, of pride that turned into humility, of loss that turned into legacy. The brass key still gleamed faintly in my hand. I held it up toward the sunset, letting it catch the light, and whispered. He bragged. I stayed quiet. And sometimes, quiet wins. The wind rose gently through the vines, carrying the scent of harvest and rain. In that sound, I heard everything that mattered, the laughter of what had been, the forgiveness of what was, and the promise of what would come next. It wasn't a victory march, but a soft exhale. Justice had done its part. Now it was time for grace to take over. As I turned to go back inside, I left the old key hanging by the doorway, a symbol not of ownership, but of understanding. Some doors aren't meant to be locked or opened. They're meant to remind us that what's behind them was worth protecting. And as the last light faded from the vineyard, I knew deep down that the story was no longer about what I had lost, but what I had chosen to keep. Quiet justice, lasting peace, a mother's mercy.